bold statement. And it comes from a much maligned prophet by the name of Daniel. Now, Daniel was a man who served as a very high administrator in the courts of several Persian kings. He was not serving in the courts of Israeli kings at all. In fact, he got pulled away to the Babylonian captivity when he was yet a young man. But he showed himself to be an astute leader, but also a very righteous man. This was, give or take, about 2,500 years ago when this took place. And in Daniel's later years, he was visited by angelic messengers and given visions of what would take place in the future. A blueprint for human history. One that is so accurate that scholars later and even to this day claim that Daniel must have been written after the fact, because what he says could never have been predicted. Well, of course, if you're God and know what's going to happen in the future and decide to tell someone, then yeah, I think that probably could happen. But Daniel has never been proven to have been written any time other than when it was, which was before these events took place. And what did Daniel prophesy about? In the near term, he prophesied about the 4 kings that would follow Darius the First, or Darius the First. He prophesied Alexander the Great and the generals that would take over after him. He prophesied about the world governments that would exist up through the Roman Empire. He prophesied about major battles that would take place. And if you read the book of Daniel, it can be very confusing. He talks about the king of the south, this and this marriage and that alliance and this person doing this, and it sounds, kind of like a political novel. But you can't really make any sense of it until you just literally take the book, pick it up, and drop it on world history. And every little piece falls into place, and you go, oh, that's this person, that's this happening, that's this event, that's this battle, that's this world power. It's absolutely unbelievable. That's why Daniel is one of the most crucial books of the Old Testament, because it lends so much accuracy to what God said would happen. So one of those prophecies that Daniel made occurs in chapter 9. So we are in Daniel chapter 9 right now. Let's look at verses 24 through 26 of Daniel chapter 9. And this is in the middle of one of these visions that he has. And the person that's coming to give him this message is the angel Gabriel, who ought to ring some bells, especially if you know the Christmas story. So, the herald of the Messiah. And he says in verse 24, 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Well, let's just reach big, shall we? I mean, really, to put an end to sin and atone for iniquity? I mean, this guy's really reaching high. And he says it's going to happen in 70 weeks. Verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So basically Daniel is right in these very few verses laying out a blueprint for world history from the time of this decree all the way up until the very end. Amazing. Now, so when we are trying to figure out this formula, there are basically then two things that we need to do. Two little portions of this. This plus this equals this. And the two things are, first of all, to understand what this decree or this word, as it says in verse 25, when that took place. If there was any way to pinpoint that date, that would at least give us an anchor. That would give us something to hold on to while we figured out the rest. The other thing we need to do is figure out what a week is. Now, you think that a week is 7 days, right? But actually, the Hebrew word shabuah really means a week of years, or 7 years. 7 years. So really what is being said here is that there are 70 weeks of years that are decreed about your people. Now just a side note here, there are a lot of people who say God's done with the Jews. That's it. They crucified the Messiah. They're out of here. God has cut them off, and Paul said it in Romans, and that's it. I very strongly disagree with that, and one of the reasons is because of what is said by Gabriel right here in the beginning of verse 24. 70 weeks are decreed what? About your people, the people of the Jews. God is not done, and in fact, what we see later in the Apocalypse in the book of the Revelation is that God actually brings about a wonderful restoration of the Jewish people to Himself. It takes place when they realize who the Messiah was. So, we know what a week is. It's 7 years. Now can we figure out when this word or decree went out to rebuild Jerusalem? Well, there are actually 3 different decrees that went out, but only one of them actually specifically said to rebuild Jerusalem. That decree came by King Artaxerxes. And we're going to be studying about that in the book of Nehemiah. So you might want to come out on Wednesday night, because that whole thing takes place there. We see where this happened in Nehemiah chapter 2, where Nehemiah, cupbearer to the king, comes before the king. And the king must have known Nehemiah pretty well, because he takes one look at him, he says, "What's up?" Okay, free Hebrew translation. It's an alternate text. He says, "What's wrong, Nehemiah?" Now, you did not go before the king without plastering a big smile on your face. But Nehemiah was so troubled that he just couldn't help it. And he went before the king. The king said, "What's wrong, Nehemiah?" And so Nehemiah shares with him the burden that's on his heart. And that leads to the king making this decree. Now, because we know when Nehemiah came before the king, what year of his reign, in what month, and through a little logic, what day, we can look back, and it was in the 20th year of his reign, and we know the year that Artaxerxes started his reign. So we can actually pinpoint, through archaeology and history, and then looking at the scriptures, the precise day upon which this happened. Now then, kind of translating that to our calendar, and you're going to have to do a little calendar math with me today, but the date that this took place was March 14th, 445 BC. So then all we have to do is do the math. If you go from March 14th, 445 BC, you can